Yes. Hello and welcome, everybody. My name is Stina Solmeister. I'll be guiding you through this event now. I work at GRID-Arendal, who has its offices on the 4th and 5th floor of the building here next to you. So I've been living for I think 20 years now in Arendal. And I have to admit, for the last 15 years, the most exciting week of the year is definitely Arendalsuke. But with now more than 2,000 debates, I really have to plan very carefully to ensure that I don't miss anything I really want to see. So I spend some time every year sifting through the program. And this year, I really lost count of the amount of events that in the title had words like security, geopolitical tension, climate crisis, environmental risks, defense, NATO, and other words that international cooperation, climate or science diplomacy, and so on. So it's a hot topic. But now, today, we will look at this from an Arctic perspective. Because in the Arctic, environmental challenges and changes, international cooperation and geopolitics are really increasingly difficult to separate from each other. And that is, of course, not something new or Arctic-specific in itself. But the accelerating warming of the Arctic, the dwindling sea ice, will just increase the economic interest in the region. And the geopolitics will become more important. And maybe, most of all, the geopolitical situation is more unpredictable than ever. So with that, we'll know that the Arctic is changing constantly and rapidly, both environmentally and politically. And during this event, we'll try to look at the question if international environmental cooperation can actually survive conflict. In this context, we also have to think maybe a little bit about the Arctic Council, because after all, the Arctic Council was born out of the need and wish of the 8 Arctic states to work together on environmental issues. So with me, I have a really nice and excellent panel of 5 people. One is still missing, but is on his way, I've been told. And I would like to welcome them on stage. They will give an answer, hopefully not just yes and no, if international cooperation can survive conflict or geopolitical conflict, but also look a little bit deeper into what is needed and what can we do in each of our roles, actually, because they come from academia, Arctic states, parliament, and the scientific community, and also from observers. So please welcome Her Excellency, Amy Baker, Ambassador of Canada to Norway. Be really careful with the steps, they're very wobbly. Thank you. Karen Landmark, Managing Director of GRID-Arendal. Gøril Heggelund, she's a research professor at the Fridtjof Nansen Institute. And Lars Halbrekken, who's a member of parliament, but also, and sorry, I have to read this to get it right, the chair of the Norwegian delegation to the Standing Committee of the Parliamentarians of the Arctic region. So that's a mouthful. And as I said, I hope to welcome also Foreign Minister Espen Barth Eide, who's on his way from another event. And I just want to say before we start that the Fridtjof Nansen Institute, the Arctic Parliamentarian Cooperation Delegation, the Norwegian Scientific Academy for Polar Research, and the University of the Arctic at UIT and GRID-Arendal are jointly organizing this event. So while we are actually waiting for the ministry, I thought before we start with the questions, we can maybe give the panelists that are here already a little bit of a 2-minute introduction to set the stage and give a little bit of feedback on what their work is in the context of this event. Ambassador Baker. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I see some people from my last event. It's much cooler in this room. My name is Amy Baker. I've been ambassador of Canada here for 3 years. This is my third Arendal Suka. I love it. Last year I broke my foot, so I was really careful on the stairs coming up. But not here, not on these stairs, but in Arendal. So I think the reason we come every year and the reason I look forward to it is it's both an opportunity to see democracy in action in Norway in a way that, I mean, Canada is so vast that you don't get the chance to see this kind of gathering in the same way, and it's really quite incredible. And also, the sessions that are in English are a great opportunity for me to share Canada's perspective, particularly on Arctic issues, and to learn and hear from others, which this session is as well. So I'm really excited to be here with you today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Lars Haltbrekken, please go ahead. And maybe you can also say something about what Arctic parliamentarians actually are and do.
And yeah, my name is then Lars Haltbrekken, as you said. I'm a member of the Norwegian Parliament from the Socialist Left Party, but also the chair of the Parliament's Arctic delegation. What do we do? Regularly, we meet Arctic parliamentarians from all other countries. These days, or since February 22nd, no, February 24th, 2022, without Russia, of course. But we meet regularly to discuss different topics that unite us and that we face all in our own countries. That could be climate change, how to combat climate change, how to adapt to climate change. Security policy is important. Indigenous people is an important topic. So this is not a place where we can decide different things. Sometimes we decide on some statements. The previous chair of the Arctic parliamentarians, Aya Chemnitz from Greenland, and the vice chair from US, Lisa Murkowski, a senator from Alaska, jointly issued a statement against the plans of the US president to take over Greenland. So those times we can stand together and show solidarity. We will have another meeting in Nuuk later this autumn. We had a meeting in Canada 2 years ago. In one of the more remote areas of Canada, Happy Valley Goose Bay. Winner.
No, but it's beautiful.
It is. It's very beautiful.
Very remote.
So, yeah. And then regularly we also get, because you asked, is it possible to have international cooperation during these times that we face today? And yes, it is. And we also get regular update from the different research group within the Arctic Council.
Thank you so much. So that was a yes.
That was a yes.
Good. We'll go further on that topic. Gøril, maybe you can say something about your research as well.
Okay. My name is Gøril Heggelund, and I'm a research professor at the Fridtjof Nansen Institute at Lysaker. Sorry about my voice, but I hope you can understand what I'm saying. I work on China, Chinese energy, climate, environmental issues. We have a few projects funded by both the Research Council of Norway and also Nordforsk. One is about China's growing role in global environmental governance. We will look into both, what is China taking on a leadership role in the different areas such as biodiversity, climate change, chemicals and plastics. So that's one important project that we've been working on in the past few years. Another project that we're working on is critical minerals in the Arctic. And the choices are for the Nordic countries, what to do about the increasing interests of finding minerals in the Arctic, and how will it impact on the indigenous peoples and other aspects. And of course, we also work on geopolitics. Fridtjof Nansen Institute is part of the Center for Geopolitics. So geopolitics is definitely a very big part of our studies at FNI.
Thank you. And Karen?
Yeah, so my name is Karen Landmark. I'm the managing director here at GRID. We are an organization that work on the so-called science to policy interface. We are also set up to support United Nations Environment Programme. So in this setting, Tina, it's fair to say that I kind of juggle a few hats, right? Because we host what is called UNEP Key Polar Center, and we joke a little bit about that being in Arendal, but seen from Nairobi, it's far enough north. So that's hosted here by GRID-Arendal, which has made us work a lot in the Arctic, a lot with Arctic Council, and in particular with the working groups there. So I kind of play the observer role in a way, but it's indirectly from GRID-Arendal's side.
Thank you. And the Arctic parliamentarians are also observers, of course, in a way.
In a way, but not every country representative is. But we have a very close connection. The Norwegian group, the Norwegian delegation, we have a very close connection with the foreign minister. So we meet him every half year to update each other on different things.
Thank you.
And
sorry, go ahead.
as I think Amy said, Norway, you didn't say it, but you said it. Norway is a very small country, so it's easy to talk to each other.
Did you say that?
I said the second part. but no, it's more that Canada is such a vast.
Yeah. But being a small country is not bad.
No.
Good, but this is not about, I see we have our last but not least panelists coming in. But I will start with a question for you, Ambassador Baker. Regarding can Arctic cooperation or environmental cooperation survive geopolitical tensions? What makes environmental cooperation actually possible when there is geopolitical tension? From your perspective and from your work?
It's a good question. I mean, the first thing I would say is it is possible. It's more difficult, for sure. But if we think back even as far as 1973, in the height of the Cold War, the United States, the USSR, Canada, the Kingdom of Denmark, and Norway in Oslo were able to pass the Convention on the Conservation of Polar Bears. So if even at the height of the Cold War something like this was possible, there is a muscle there that we can use. And I think the reason for that is, hello, Minister. I think the reason for that is that there is something that all Arctic states, including Russia, have in common, and that's that all Arctic states want the Arctic and the high north to be well governed, and they want it to be perceived to be well governed. And this is at the heart of the concept of Arctic state primacy. So for Russia staying in the Arctic Council this long, there's a reason for that. They see this as important to them, at least to a certain extent. So there's something to build from. And honestly, all we need to do is look to Norway's chairship of the Arctic Council in that difficult moment to see a real masterclass in how you are able to continue to do that, going from nothing to written procedures to working groups meeting virtually. And that's something that Denmark will be continuing through their chairship, and then goes to Sweden and then eventually to Canada. It's something we need to continue to coordinate on. Where are those lines, and how do we walk that line as effectively as Norway was able to do during their chairship? I was going to say that even before you joined.
I'll actually give the word to you now, so you can react on that. But also from Norway's perspective, how do you what do we do to create dialogue and to have that cooperation? And yeah, I mean, you can answer the question, is it still possible in tension as well from your perspective? But
To maintain the Arctic Council specifically, or
No, what was the
I
question?
hope the question was, can environmental cooperation still exist and
Yeah.
survive geopolitical conflict?
yes, I think so. I mean, it's definitely harder, and I think the experience we had and the Kingdom of Denmark has now is that, of course, it is these are low-key chairships. You can do something. You can basically continue what's already started. There was nobody's against that, and you need to have that type of cooperation which we developed, which was controversial in the beginning, but we got everybody on board, and that seems to be there. But I think one of the things that worries me, frankly, is not only about Russia, but also about developments in the US when it comes to the attitude towards science and facts. That some of the best research on climate issues in general, but also on Arctic issues, has been US, not only but inclusively. And I think the relationship between this current administration and science is difficult, put it that way, and that means that we have two problems. One is that one country that could contribute more actually contribute less, and another country, actually Russia, whatever else they do wrong, there's still a certain recognition of facts and science in Russia, but they're not necessarily sharing data, or we're not. So we don't really have the amount of scientific data that the researchers in this field need to have constantly in order to map out. So this is something we should try to address, and which is a structural problem. But as of now, I think that all the Arctic states and all those who are interested in the Arctic seem to think that on average it's better to have cooperation than not to have it. And there's a long list of countries that like to join as observers. They can't, because in order to join as observers we need a proper political meeting, which we can't do while the war is on. But one of them is the UAE. And so I asked, why would the UAE, the Emirates, want to join the Arctic Council? Well, because they realize that the global function, for instance, the cooling effect, the Arctic is the refrigerator of the world, the water streams are passing by to cool down. When this changes, that affects everything, including their neighborhood. We are sitting in the part of the world where climate change goes fastest, and with the ensuing nature change that flows from climate change, and the new species meeting each other and so on. And this knowledge is simply so important for the whole world that we can't be without it. So to navigate in this while we have serious geopolitical tension is difficult but necessary.
Karen?
No, I mean, it was so nice before you came, Espen, because then you always take the good points. But I want to follow up. I was joking. Yeah. I want to follow up with what you said, Tina, in the beginning, and also that you touched in, that the Arctic is like an early warning region, right? UNEP, that we work closely with, has a global mandate, but is often funded through development aid funding from the countries. So the Arctic has kind of is underfunded. In a way. So to see that flow of knowledge and scientific knowledge going both ways, like informing the global environmental agenda about what's happening in the Arctic, exactly for the reasons you said, Tina, that things are moving so fast, and that you also said, Espen. So having that kind of knowledge exchange is super important also when it comes to the global environmental agenda. So it informs much more than the Arctic. And then we can summarize by saying, the cooperation has to continue, right?
Yes.
But I acknowledge that it's difficult. But for much more than the Arctic, this collaboration is important.
Maybe we can also move to GRID, because you mentioned you work a lot on topics together with, or on China. So actually you can see that environmental cooperation also there is not really happening in isolation from geopolitics. So can you maybe explain a little bit what has changed over the last 10, 15 years?
Well, I think some of the changes is, of course, geopolitical. You know, the environment, the global environment is changing in many ways in the last decade or so. So it's much more political, and there's more. I mean, resources are seen through the security lens in many ways. So I think security has become such a big topic. But I think China, is very much interested in collaborating on environmental issues, and I know we do collaborate with China in Norway. We have had good projects actually over many years, and we need. It has been said, of course, many times, but we need to have China on board, I think, to change. I mean, China is also the cause of quite a few problems, environmental problems, but we also need, not alone, of course, but we also need China on board to address many of these problems, including climate change and other, energy-related issues. One example from Norway and collaboration with China, we have the carbon market that's been ongoing for 10 years or so, and you also have the good cooperation on mercury, which is also a topic in the Arctic, right? So you can see that China is an observer state to the Arctic Council, and many of its scientists are allowed to be in the working groups of the Arctic Council. And mercury is, of course, on the agenda there as well. So you can see that, China can bring back some of the knowledge and research results from the Arctic Council working groups, and also vice versa. I mean, China has strong scientists that can, contribute to some of the work that is done in the Arctic Council. And collaboration between Norway and China on mercury, for instance, it started around 2006, and it was actually a science project, but then became more of like a science policy project, because China needed to have more knowledge about its own mercury problems, challenges, and the Norwegian project was very helpful. I mean, it was a collaboration between China and Norway and scientists, and then in the end, you cannot see it's the cause, but of course, it was important in the process leading up to the Minamata Convention that China, in the end, ratified in 2016.
Thank you. So everybody agrees. We need more cooperation and environmental cooperation, and it can still happen, even if it's more difficult. But the need for international cooperation is not just maybe enough. Maybe we need also political will. And how do you create that? And I'm looking at the two politicians, and the diplomat.
I would like to start with the reason why I joined the environmental movement back in 1988. The two things that we faced at that time was the hole in the ozone layer and acid rain. Those are no longer any problems.
Check. Yeah.
Yeah, check.
Is there only two checks?
It is.
Yeah.
Good start.
And why did we succeed on solving those problems? Well, we had some researchers saying that, hey, we got some problems here. Then we had some environmental groups pushing. We had some politicians taking up the case, pushing the industry, the business. And through the cooperation between industry, politicians, environmentalists throughout the countries, we had some environmental international agreements that reduced the problems dramatically. So I think that politicians can't solve this alone. We need to cooperate with business. We need some researchers, we need some environmentalists to push. But in a lot of fields, now we're trying to combat climate change, which is a bigger problem than the hole in the ozone layer and acid rain. But sometimes I think that we see the business sector is way ahead of at least some of the politicians. Without mentioning names, in finding the solutions. And also some countries are also leading, and China is doing a a lot as well on combating this and serving as examples. I think that can also help us to combat the issue of climate change.
But I'll just add a little twist to the question then, because you mentioned ozone and the Montreal Convention and acid rain and so on. I think a number of years ago, about 10 years ago, UNEP did actually a review of all the multilateral environmental agreements. I think there were 96. 4 had been successful.
Yeah.
Montreal and acid rain were 2 of them. I think POP's Stockholm Convention was another one.
I forgot those, yeah.
There's a 4th one, which But what happens then with the others? I mean, we talked about the plastic agreement, the global agreement on plastics before. What's lacking then in the others? So
if I may, because I was president of UNEA when we established a mandate for the plastics agreement. And of course, I would be happier if we now had the full-fledged agreement. But the attention to plastics has influenced a lot of action. So, it's not like either you succeed or you fail completely. So, a lot of things happened. You don't see plastic straws in, you have this cap on the bottles which you can't take away. I mean, all these small things, they are direct consequences of regional organizations or countries trying to do something about it because of this global attention. And, I will be the first one to say that we haven't succeeded on climate change, but the prediction for global warming is much lower after Paris than it was before Paris, because a lot of activity is happening and there's a lock-in effect. I think now there's less talk about climate change, sadly, but many of the innovations in place, I mean, the electric transport is winning, and the electric car is a better product, and people realize that it's winning the market gradually around the world, particularly cheap Chinese cars in the global south, which are now really popular because of the oil crunch, right? So there's also this positive lock-ins in innovation that's happening. So I wouldn't say that only 4 or 5 are successful, because the global attention to these things, I would also say the nature agreement that we came out of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity, I mean, it's not a total success, but there is more attention on the need to care also about the loss of habitat, for instance. The Chinese minister Wang went home and declared 46 new national parks, as they can do in China, because you just decided. Somebody protested, you build them anyway. But I mean, there is a real dialogue now between us and some others and China on Kamilar and on the Arctic Ocean and so on, which is constructive and based on trying to implement some of this. So yes, there should be more. I'm the first one to say that, but there are things happening out there.
Very good, but maybe I'm looking mostly at those that are doing science to policy a little bit here, and that's, I think, both Karen, of course, and Guril. Are we then moving away from needing these multilateral binding agreements and say, should we kind of go in the margin and have other smaller agreements that are maybe not legally binding, because business is moving forward? And how is it more difficult to operate? Because it is more difficult to operate, also in the science to policy. Because yes, there's more happening in the margin thanks to awareness and so on, even if you do not have legally binding agreements. But there is also a lot more science that is under pressure and not taken seriously, that is completely already with facts and all there. And still there's a lot of, like, the polarized world in science is also there. And there's a lot of people that try to say that the science is not right and kind of try to basically discredit all the science that is there. So what is more difficult now? And how can we make this science to policy? How can we inform the politicians better?
Well, I'm a big fan of the multilateral collaboration, so I wouldn't definitely not go away from the big global agreements or the negotiations of a plastic agreement, for instance. I think that science can inform these processes, and they always do. But even more important now, I would say, is to keep the focus on science-based decision making, right? Because science is also under threat. There are many. I mean, we had a conversation earlier today about how negotiations are happening now, and increasingly we discuss what is reality, who is in, who did what, and who's going to pay for that. So, insisting from a science to policy point of view, insisting on a fact-based, science-based way of making decisions, and that can happen in the margins of an agreement or in the middle of it. But I think I can speak for myself, and then you can do the scientific. But that is what we do, right? We try to affect policy wherever we can. But I would definitely not only move that to the margins. Yeah.
Well, I think, I mean, I'm working, work on China together with my colleagues at FNI, Iselin sitting over there. I think from the Chinese point of view, the United Nations multilateral cooperation is very important. China actually recently issued this policy white paper on global governance, and we have a policy brief for those who read Norwegian who can share later. But I think for China's sake, I think they see, the negotiations, that's where they should make the decisions on the climate change, for instance, and all plastics. I mean, maybe sometimes, there are some challenges, of course. But I think, for instance, like in the climate change negotiation, China has, become much more sort of proactive and working very hard. And actually, China has, just published or issued its climate change 5-year plan, which is a new one that came in end of July, which is, very important both with regard to science and also regard to policies. That China would like to take on a more global role in the climate change governance. So we will see how that happens. And of course, China has this policy that came a few years back. That it's called policy or science policy. So science is very important in China in many ways to guide policy making. Although, of course, sometimes it doesn't always. It doesn't reach the policymakers always, but there are some close channels between, for instance, some of the research institutions under the ministries, for instance. They can give the information to the policymakers. I mean, if the policymakers always listen, we don't know, but at least to a certain extent, there could be at least some input information.
And Lars was first, but Lars, maybe you can also try to bring it a little bit back to the Arctic as well, and make it Arctic specific, because we're looking at very global issues as well now.
I'll try, but first I have to say what I had thought of saying. I think it's not that you have to choose between the global agreements and smaller agreements between some states. You can have both. And then you said that there is a problem with some politicians misquoting or don't believe what the science says. And I have a very fresh example of what the scientists could do then. I don't know how many here that listens to Politisk Kvarter.
We did
It's a
this
radio
morning,
show
yes.
this morning.
Yes.
This morning there was a member of the Standing Committee of Energy and Environment from a party that is pretty big on the polls at the moment, saying something like oil has created peace and wealth for everyone on the earth. And this was, and he said, this is not my words. These are the words from IPCC. And he also said that IPCC means that we could not have fast cuts in the emissions. We should have slower cuts. And I see that someone who has worked closely with the IPCC says no. And one of the researchers behind the latest IPCC reports from the University of Oslo wrote on Facebook, this is wrong. This is not what the IPCC says. The IPCC says the different, the opposite. And that's important that researchers dare to do things like that. And that post from her was spread widely.
Yes.
So
Okay.
I think that's very important.
Be brave.
Stand up.
And then Arctic. Espen will take on Arctic.
The Arctic parliamentarian.
Yeah, I actually wanted to connect on the China thing. I mean, one thing that should be said is that China, of course, also saw the business opportunity. Because if you listen to all of us 15 to 20 years ago, we were saying that we now need a much more renewable energy system, and for countries without a lot of mountains and rain, that has to be photovoltaic or solar or wind or similar. And we needed electric transport, and with that requires batteries and turbines and all these things, and started building them. And they got extremely good at it, which is now the new problem is that they're so good at it that nobody can compete. So now we're complaining that they're so good at it. But the point is actually this was exactly what we said we would need. So the Chinese basically said, yeah, we can make that over here, and they dominate the market. The bad news of that, of course, is not to blame them for doing what everybody said they should do, but for the rest, not while the Chinese were inventing all this, the German car makers were trying to cheat the authorities by saying that there aren't really much emissions with the diesel cars and so on. So they lost 10 years, and see the result. So this is part of the reality. One of the most positive things is that this increasingly cheap technology for producing and using clean electricity is now becoming available to the global south. And the global south, where most people live, are realizing that to be so dependent on oil is dangerous because somebody closes the Hormuz Straits and so on. So this might actually be the driver of real change. Economics and the need for strategic independence is actually a driver that sometimes coincides with what we need to do to move towards climate. But then we have to recognize that was actually a good thing, and that our problem is that we didn't do the same.
So I'm not sure if you're very good politicians or I'm a very bad moderator,
Yeah,
but
on
I'll have a
Arctic.
question about the Arctic
Yeah,
now. Very good. And I'll move away from Ambassador Baker. We have talked a little bit about the global issues that, like the science that has to be informed, and everything is really connected. So there's a lot of environmental pressures facing the Arctic. From climate change to pollution and so on. They are mostly global in origin, but affect Canada and the Arctic as a whole really a lot. So what does Canada need actually from international environmental cooperation?
Thank you for the question. I love the way you framed it, because actually what we often hear is that things that are happening in the Arctic and the rest of the world, more visibility on that, but the reverse is also very true. And so, the first and most obvious answer is we need everybody in the fight against climate change, and we need everybody to help with wherever that's originating in the world. So that's a very obvious piece, but I'm not going to go there because I'm going to talk about the Arctic more specifically.
Thank you.
My points with the moderator. I think there are a couple different ways to answer that question in terms of what we need. It's what we need and who we need it from. And there are different groups and different organizations in different states that we can work with in different ways. One really specific example of something that NATO is doing is the Center of Excellence on Climate and Security located in Montreal. And Norway is a member of that. And they've just done a really important study on the interaction between the infrastructure that we're building in the north and the climate changes that are happening, and how we need to be responsive to that. So that's something that helps Canada, that's something that helps other Arctic states, and because it's a NATO Center of Excellence, it has a broader membership. So there are things like that. The other thing I'd say is we're really broadly open to working with others, with one very important caveat, which is that the values base from which we operate in the Arctic needs to be accepted by those people we're working with. What I mean by that is everything that we do in the Canadian Arctic, we do starting from the principle of listening to and understanding the perspectives of the Indigenous people and the Northerners who live there. That's our number one priority, and that's how we actually have effective results. So as long as others take that on as the starting principle and respect the rule of law and want to engage within that context, we're extremely open to working with others, whether it's on research or other issues. And I think a shout out to all of those who have helped get the Inuit Circumpolar Council permanent membership into the IMO. I mean, that's also a really important way of bringing those perspectives into these conversations. And the other thing, just to maybe circle back a little bit to Russia, is it's not science, but there is indigenous traditional knowledge that crossed all those borders for years and years and years, and that can inform our approaches. And the indigenous peoples in our own countries are also connected to that, and to that knowledge that is shared by those who are within Russia. And finally, a quick shout out to Nordforsk as well, and the United States actually took part along with Canada, Norway, Sweden, Kingdom of Denmark. Am I forgetting some? Finland. In the, would never forget Finland. They're the happiest people in the world. But in a really important research call on sustainability and sustainable development in the Arctic, which is now starting to come out with some really interesting results. So another way that we're getting a lot of good help from others. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And thank you for mentioning indigenous knowledge as well. And you did that at the beginning as well. But I really wanted to see if there were people in the public that had questions, Arctic-specific questions on this. So is there anybody before we maybe take a last round? No? I have more questions, so that's not a problem. But no?
And that.
Oh, you have one. Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering
To whom are you?
to whoever wants
Okay.
to answer. Like, given that the Arctic is, well, most of it is in Russia, does that present any sort of unique challenges in terms of collaboration, in terms of any sort of scientific collaboration, or political collaboration, or just given that it's so much of it is there, it seems like it's a pretty big challenge to overcome when it comes to policy for the Arctic.
I
Go
can
ahead.
start. Well, yes, indeed. I mean, I would say roughly half of the Arctic coast is Russia, and the rest of us share the other half of the coast. And what is the Arctic? The whole ocean is not all of it is anybody's actually, but in that sense, yes, you're right. This is why it's it is from our side so important to keep them in the Arctic Council. Also waiting for better times, so they maintain that relationship. And I think the same goes the other way. There's actually shared interest in sharing knowledge and what's happening. Russia, by the way, is extremely affected by climate change. That's something we don't speak so much about. But the Russian high north, you have cities, railroads, roads built on permafrost, believing that permafrost was perma. It turned out it wasn't not permanent, and the breaking up, which actually drives. So there's less through traffic in the Northeast Passage than I thought it would be 10, 20 years ago. But there's a lot of local traffic because you have to transport by sea, which is easier because of less ice, where you normally could transport on land. So Russia knows very well that climate change is a big problem for economy, life, security, safety in the north. That is still true, and I think for that reason, and we see some of this in Svalbard, because it's a much minuscule scale because not so many people, but we see the same phenomena even on the researchers at Ny-Ålesund Station, when they're done with their day's work looking at all the signs of climate change in the world, they go back and see that the building they live in is cracking up because it was built on permafrost, and we spend a lot of money just to keep it as it used to be. So that's a Russia dimension that one shouldn't forget.
Was there somebody else? Yes, go ahead.
It's slightly the same vein, but at what stage does the conflict in Ukraine and what's going on there, if it turns into like a frozen conflict or it goes on for many more years, at what stage is the Arctic so important that we do need to get back to normality in the Arctic?
Who wants to take that one?
It's been.
Yeah, nobody. Well, I mean, it's a very good question. I mean, it's a good question, hard to answer, because I think what we're trying to say, all of us, is that there still has to be a certain level of cooperation because it is so important, and it will of course become increasingly important because, you know, climate change doesn't begin in the Arctic, but it ends in the Arctic, and so you don't fix the climate problem in the Arctic. But if you want to learn about the effects and how to adapt to climate change, it's a good place to go because it's speedy change, right? So that point will come. I mean, I hope it will be. I mean, I hope, you know, I work every day to make sure the war in Ukraine is over for other reasons. But I would say a general argument for ending wars is that mankind should actually spend most of its time, our time, on dealing with the real issues that, you know, need some real long-term solutions, which is nature and climate change and so on. So it's yet another motivation for trying to get to a better place also in Ukraine.
I completely agree. Just maybe to add one thing. This morning on the ambassadors panel, the Ukrainian ambassador was asking about Ukraine. Do we build back or do we build new better? And I think maybe back to normal isn't the right question for us to be asking. It's how can we evolve a situation with the limitations that we have, recognizing that the rules-based international order needs to be respected. There's no way around that. So how do we move forward? And it's a bit of a different question than reverting to what was there before. And I think that's one that will need a lot of discussion over the coming months and years.
Thank you. So does anybody have any quick remarks at the end of this on what we can do to improve international cooperation from your own perspective, from, for example, the observers' side, or what is needed from others to help that?
To circle back a little bit to the beginning, I think maybe I'm off.
Yes.
That was it.
That was it.
That was it. Maybe you can hear me if I speak really loud.
Yeah, I think you got a new mic here. Yeah.
It's fine. But I think for us it's important to continue to bring what's happening in the Arctic. We say what's happening in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic, right? So for us it's about bringing attention to the Arctic, to the global environmental agenda. So we'll keep doing that and just kind of insist on cooperation that allows for the best scientific and indigenous knowledge systems based solution for the Arctic and for the world.
Thank you. I'll just, can I go that way?
Sure.
You can
No,
get
no,
the last
I'll
one.
wait.
I think I would just add that that very honest and frank discussions among allies about how far you go and where you take things are really, really important. And we need to continue to do that as the A7, the remaining Arctic states, and in collaboration with others who have an interest in the issues, just to really make sure that we're on the same page and coherent in the approach that we're taking. And that has worked so far in the limited way we've been able to make it work, and I think we continue with that.
Thank you.
Well, just hopefully the voice will not crack, but I think what we see, of course, the Arctic states, of course, are the Arctic states, but then also you have all the observer states in the Arctic Council, for instance. I mean, that's also a way to cooperate about, on using, knowledge from different countries and participation. I think that's could be a good thing, yes, in the working groups of the Arctic Council.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I think that the work we do as Arctic parliamentarians, the connection we have between us and the connection we have with both civil society and researchers is extremely important, and with indigenous groups in each and every country, this is important to continue and to support this work.
First, what Lars said is very important. I totally agree with that. I want to say one thing, both which is Arctic and also globally relevant, is that for those of you in the research community, most politicians actually listen. IPCC has been a success. It has defined, I agree, I had the same reflection this morning, but I mean generally, and I've been in many of these COPs, both on climate and nature and others, there is a recognition that there is a scientific reality, that it matters. I'm sure if you work in this business, you would like to see policy change going faster. I agree, but don't get frustrated in the sense that you think nobody. It's actually defining policies, and it's not only in political circles, also in business circles. People are picking up on this. They experience that the climate change that was warned about is actually happening. So there is a feedback loop into politics. We just have to accelerate it. But it would be good if we just could say, this is real, this matters, we need to deal with it, and then just go to the distributional issue. Because you can still say that my country, it is unfair that my country has to do so much for that. That's okay. But then how do you do the maths so that it actually adds up in the end? Then you're in a better place. And I would also say all of those who work with colleagues in the US, take good care of them. Better times will come, but they need to be encouraged to not lose interest in this anti-scientific times.
Anti-scientific times. So I think to conclude, we have an answer. Yes, environmental international cooperation can survive geopolitical conflict, although maybe we have to adapt on how we do the cooperation, use all our allies, and listen to all the scientists and the indigenous knowledge that there is around. And I think, taking from this morning, be brave also when we hear something that is absolutely not true, react, and be brave on that. Thank you so much, everybody. I have a few presents for you. Sorry, I forgot to put them on the stage.
Okay. Okay. So hello, welcome. My name is Vegard Bergård. I will moderate this session here today, and I'm happy to see quite many people here. Of course, that's no surprise. We are used to people leaning forward in excitement when we start talking about the EA and Norway grants. Or not always, maybe, but our job here today is to show you why these grants matter. And I'm not planning to introduce what the EA and Norway grants are here today, because I assume that you know just a little bit about them already. And also we have a great panel with us today, and we want to let them have time to speak. And now I'm looking for all the panelists. I see 4 of them, and no, 5. I see 5. So I can start introducing slowly. First, of course, we have the Norwegian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Espen Barth Grants, for a long time. Like you mentioned here 2 years ago, you were also State Secretary in 2000 and 2001.